Hey, so before I start, I just wanted to say this video idea came to me from a college professor I had, and it's only a theory, okay? Got that? A theory. Good. So, Africa is pretty amazing. It's a rich land with some spectacular resources and natural beauty. It contains the world's second largest rainforest, the Congo rainforest. Impressive deposits of gold, iron, and copper are to be found here, among many other minerals, and it features some of the richest wildlife areas on the globe. But also, today, many places in Africa lag behind the rest of the world when it comes to life expectancy, income, and access to resources like fresh water and food. This leads many to ask why, in a land so abundant with resources, is there such scarcity and lack of development? Well, as it turns out, geography might be to blame. Many people connect the issues plaguing Africa today back to colonialism, which is a fair assessment, but for me, it doesn't really capture the full picture. That's not to say colonialism hasn't had horrific and lasting consequences on the people of Africa, but it's possible that the true issue is one with the continent itself. All of this might come down to the fact that Africa is longer than it is wide. Really. Here's Eurasia, Europe and Asia. You can see it's much longer than it is tall. But looking at Africa, it's virtually the opposite, stacked vertically, taller than it is long. This might not sound like a big deal, but just you wait. So if you haven't realized, depending on your latitude, the climate of an area will change. Near the equator will be hot and humid, while near the poles will be cold and dry, for the most part. But changing longitude doesn't really affect these things. So being longer than tall, Eurasia has mostly the same climate types throughout, whereas Africa passes through many different climate zones. It starts with a Mediterranean climate, which quickly becomes semi-desert. Full desert is next, then it's back to semi-desert, sometimes called the Sahel. After the Sahel comes grasslands, which finally become forest. At this point, we have crossed over the equator and we begin to find more grassland, then more semi-desert, another full desert, and then finally back to the Mediterranean climate we found at the northern tip of the continent. Then add in features like highland climates, where there's highland arid, semi-arid, semi-humid, and humid, and you have a very fractured landscape. Compare this to Eurasia, which has a polar climate, a temperate climate, a small Mediterranean climate, a desert, and a tropical zone. There are some alpine areas as well, most notably the Himalayas, but even still you can see these massive areas of single climates form, and each one roughly corresponds with a powerful area. So, the eastern temperate zone became China, while the tropical zone to the south became India. The desert became the Muslim Empire, and the western temperate region became the powers of Europe. The Mediterranean also roughly corresponds with the heart of the Roman Empire. What all of this shows is that large areas of the same climate allow civilizations to unite, grow, and thrive. This happens because people who live in a single climate survive by farming and hunting the same foods, experience the same hardships, and therefore live very similar lives. This allows them to interact with each other, forming a common language and systems of interaction like trade and defense from outsiders. They develop the same lifestyle and end up sharing a common culture without even trying. In short, climate unites people through culture. It's interesting to think that the reason the Roman Empire failed was because of invaders from the north who lived in a different climate zone and therefore held different values and cultures than the Romans who tried to conquer them. And the Mongols who invaded China never permanently ruled, also being from a different climate zone, while they did have great success conquering westward where the climates were roughly the same. It seems these places were destined to remain independent in large part due to their unifying geography, which made them resilient to outside forces. But in Africa, you didn't really get this. Of course, some empires emerged. States like Egypt and Mali experienced times of great power and prosperity, but Egypt was locked to the Nile and was never capable of expanding much beyond the river valley, and Mali straddled the narrow Sahel region between the Sahara and the tropics, which was much larger centuries ago, but still limited. Beyond their lands, they found people with vastly different lifestyles and cultures who would resist assimilation by different cultures, and they became trapped by their own climate, unable to expand and develop further. A map of individual African culture groups would look something like this, with thousands of tribes and clans, each one distinct and therefore opposed to joining forces to resist all outside powers. This also caused small tribes to never develop much trade beyond their neighbors, and therefore new ideas and technologies could not easily diffuse through Africa the same way they had between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. That's not to say Africa didn't have innovations of its own, and actually many of mankind's earliest advancements in language, medicine, architecture, and mathematics came from Africa. But without large-scale exchange throughout the continent and with other civilizations, these advancements were impeded and the numerous tribes of Africa fell behind technologically. By the 16th century, Africans were confronted by people who had benefited from a unifying geography and trade with distant lands. They wielded guns, sailed on massive ships, and completely overpowered local populations. Africans fell victim to harsh colonial rule while foreign powers competed to take advantage of the land that had doomed its own inhabitants. Because Europe was smaller and relatively poor in resources, Europeans were forced to seek outside their own lands to advance their civilizations. So, geography both caused the Africans to lag behind and also encouraged Europeans to push out beyond their own lands. Then, the colonizers grouped the people into arbitrary borders. So, desert tribes could be paired with a Sahel and a forest tribe and told they were one, like in the modern country of Mali. This, of course, led to internal issues within basically every African nation. Dissension and civil war has followed in nearly every state since colonization, and you can see the countries that have had the most success today are the ones that lucked out and ended up with borders that coincided with the natural climate zones. These included nations like Ethiopia, which for the most part is humid and mountainous and managed to maintain independence throughout colonization, Egypt, which is all desert surrounding a single river with a long history of unity, and South Africa, which is mostly semi-arid Mediterranean climate, and where it wasn't, they allowed the tribes to stay independent, like this nation of Lesotho, smack dab in the middle of the country. There are, of course, simplifications in all of this, but generally speaking, this is how geography made it difficult for African empires to expand and withstand the test of time. Thanks for watching. I hope I didn't step on too many toes with this one. Let me know how I did in the comments. Again, this is just a theory I learned, and of course, other factors were at play as well. If you want to see more like this, why not subscribe and give this video a like? I'll be back next week with another video. Thanks.